Police stations are supposed to be places of safety, fortresses of justice where citizens, regardless of color, creed, or background, can walk through the doors and receive protection under the law. But on one seemingly ordinary Wednesday morning in May, Sergeant Derek Callahan transformed his precinct into something else entirely, a monument to exclusion, a barrier wrapped in a badge, a place where the color of a man's skin mattered more than the content of his complaint. When Reverend Marcus Thompson walked through those doors, he expected what he'd received 3 times before over the past decade. Courteous service, a filed report, maybe some follow-up questions. Instead, he received mockery, dismissal, a contemptuous refusal that would ignite a firestorm nobody saw coming. Callahan made a calculation that morning. He saw an older black man in casual clothes and assumed silence would follow. Compliance, perhaps a quiet complaint that would vanish into the bureaucratic void where so many others had disappeared before. What Callahan didn't know what he couldn't have known, because arrogance blinds those who wield power without accountability, was that this particular man represented something far larger than himself. Marcus Thompson wasn't just a citizen, he was a shepherd, a leader, a man who had spent 25 years building not just a congregation, but a community of 500 souls who trusted him, followed him, and would move mountains if he asked. Callahan refused one report on Wednesday morning. By Thursday morning, 500 people stood outside his precinct. 4 television news crews broadcast the scene live. National media picked up the story within hours. The hashtag spread across social media like wildfire. And Sergeant Derek Callahan's career, built on a foundation of dismissiveness and protected by a union that valued loyalty over justice, crumbled in less than 48 hours. This isn't a story about one bad cop. It's a story about what happens when a community refuses to be silent, when faith demands action, when 500 voices speak as one, and institutions that thought themselves untouchable discover they've been standing on sand the entire time. One refused report. One underestimated congregation. Total collapse. Reverend Marcus Thompson was 58 years old, though most people guessed younger when they first met him. His face carried the lines of a life fully lived, but his eyes, deep brown and perpetually kind, radiated a warmth that made people feel seen. Truly seen. Not just acknowledged, but valued. He stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that had once carried bricks and lumber during his younger years in construction before God called him into ministry. Silver threaded through his close-cropped hair and neatly trimmed beard, giving him an air of dignified wisdom. When he spoke, his voice resonated with a rich baritone that could fill a sanctuary without shouting or comfort a grieving widow with a whisper. For 25 years, Marcus had led Grace Community Church, a congregation that started with 37 members meeting in a rented elementary school gymnasium and grew into a spiritual family of 500, gathering in a beautiful brick building on the corner of 8th and Magnolia. The church wasn't the largest in the city, but it was known, respected. Grace Community didn't just preach the gospel on Sunday mornings, they lived it 7 days a week. Every third Saturday, Marcus and a team of volunteers served hot meals to over 200 homeless individuals in the park downtown. Rain or shine, summer heat or winter cold, they showed up. The church ran after-school tutoring programs for at-risk youth, operated a scholarship fund that had sent 43 young people to college, and Marcus himself had mediated gang truces on 3 separate occasions, sitting across from young men with guns tucked in their waistbands, speaking words of peace until violence gave way to conversation. City council members knew his name. The mayor had attended 2 community events at Grace Community. Police officers, at least the good ones, appreciated his work keeping young people out of trouble and off the streets. Marcus was married to Dorothy Thompson, his partner of 30 years. She taught kindergarten at Riverside Elementary and had the kind of gentle patience that made 5-year-olds fall in love with learning. Together, they had raised 3 children who made them proud. A daughter who was a pediatrician in Atlanta, a son who taught high school history in Chicago, and their youngest, a Marine officer currently stationed in North Carolina. 5 grandchildren called Marcus Papa and filled his phone with photos and video calls that made him smile even on the hardest days. There were no scandals in Marcus Thompson's life, no financial improprieties, no moral failures whispered about in the community. He wasn't politically radical or confrontational. He voted yes, but he didn't lead marches or organize protests. His ministry focused on service, feeding the hungry, mentoring the lost, preaching hope to the hopeless. If you had asked anyone in the city to describe Marcus Thompson, the words would have been consistent. Kind, steady, faithful, trustworthy. A good man. The kind of pastor who still made hospital visits at 2 a.m. and remembered your cousin's name 6 months after meeting them once. This was the man who walked into Midtown Precinct on Wednesday morning, expecting basic human decency, and received something else entirely. Wednesday began like most Wednesdays. Marcus woke at 5:30 in the morning, a habit ingrained over decades. He spent the first hour in prayer and scripture reading sitting in the small office off the master bedroom while Dorothy slept. By 6:30, he was dressed and brewing coffee when his phone rang. The church secretary, Mrs. Angela Harris, rarely called this early. Her voice was tight with distress. "Pastor Marcus, you need to get to the church. Someone vandalized the van." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The church van wasn't just transportation, it was a lifeline. They used it to pick up elderly members who couldn't drive to Sunday service, to transport donated food to the community meals, to shuttle youth group kids to summer camp. Vandalism meant repairs. Repairs meant expenses the church budget hadn't planned for. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Bad. You need to see it yourself." 20 minutes later, Marcus stood in the church parking lot, staring at destruction that felt personal. The van, a 12-passenger white Ford that the congregation had purchased together 5 years ago through fundraising dinners and bake sales, had been savaged. All 4 tires were slashed, rubber shredded, and hanging in strips. The windshield had been shattered spiderweb cracks, radiating from a point of impact. But it was the spray paint that turned vandalism into hate crime. Across both sides of the van, in crude red letters 2 feet tall, someone had painted the most vile racial slurs Marcus had seen in years. Words that cut. Words designed to dehumanize, to intimidate, to remind him that in some people's eyes his congregation would never be fully American, fully equal, fully human. Angela stood beside him, hands trembling. The security camera caught them. 2 men around 3 in the morning. They were white, looked young, but the footage is grainy. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. He just stared at the van, at the evidence of hatred left like a calling card in the place his congregation gathered to worship a God of love. Dorothy arrived 15 minutes later. She took one look at the van, at the slurs, and her mouth set in a hard line. She was a gentle woman by nature, but there was steel beneath that gentleness. "We're filing a police report. Not a question. A statement." Marcus nodded slowly. "Insurance requires it, and if this is a hate crime, the police need to investigate." "You've filed reports there before," Dorothy said. "It's always been fine, right?" "Always," Marcus confirmed. "Professional. Courteous. I don't expect any problems." He was wrong. Sergeant Derek Callahan hated desk duty. Hated it with the kind of burning resentment that made every interaction with the public feel like an imposition. He was a cop, damn it. He was supposed to be on patrol, enforcing the law, commanding respect from the driver's seat of a cruiser with lights and sirens at his disposal. Instead, here he sat behind bulletproof glass at the public service counter of Midtown Precinct, processing reports and answering stupid questions from citizens who didn't understand how the real world worked. Callahan was 39 years old and looked like exactly what he was. A man who believed authority was his birthright. He had a stocky build, thick neck and arms that he kept crossed in a perpetual defensive posture. His crew cut was military precise, his jaw perpetually tight, and his eyes, small and hard, scanned every person who approached the counter with suspicion. 12 years on the force. 12 years of what he considered exemplary service, though his personnel file told a different story. 7 formal complaints, all dismissed thanks to a police union that protected its own with ferocity. 5 of those complaints involved minority citizens. The accusations ranged from excessive force to discriminatory language to refusal to take reports seriously. But every time the union lawyers had found technicalities, inconsistencies in witness testimony, lack of concrete evidence. Callahan had learned the system, knew where the camera blind spots were, knew how to write reports that painted the complainant as aggressive, uncooperative, or dishonest. He knew that if he kept his language just vague enough, if he claimed officer safety concerns or failure to comply with lawful orders, he could justify almost anything. In Callahan's worldview, the problem wasn't his behavior. The problem was people who didn't respect authority, people who thought they could demand things from him, question him, challenge him. And in his experience, those people often had one thing in common. Callahan would never have called himself racist, at least not out loud. He had black colleagues. He'd arrested white criminals. But in the privacy of his own thoughts, he believed certain neighborhoods bred certain problems. Certain communities produced certain types of people. And when those people walked into his precinct with complaints and demands, he saw it as playing the victim, looking for handouts, trying to claim special treatment. This Wednesday morning, Callahan was in an especially foul mood. His supervisor had assigned him to desk duty for the entire week as punishment for arriving late to roll call 3 times. So when the door opened at 9:15 and he saw an older black man in jeans and a polo shirt walking toward the counter, Callahan's default assumptions activated immediately. Here we go, he thought. Another one. Marcus approached the service counter with the same calm demeanor he brought to everything. He carried his phone with the security footage queued up and photos of the vandalized van ready to show. He'd done this before, filed reports for a stolen church laptop, broken windows from teenagers throwing rocks, a minor car accident in the parking lot. The process was simple routine. "Good morning, officer. I need to file a vandalism report." Sergeant Callahan didn't look up. He was staring at his computer screen, fingers tapping irritably on the keyboard. For a full 15 seconds, he ignored Marcus completely. Marcus waited. Patience was a virtue he'd cultivated over decades of ministry. Finally, Callahan glanced up. His eyes swept over. Marcus took in the casual clothes, the silver hair, the dark skin, and something in his expression hardened. "What exactly do you want me to do about it?" Callahan's tone was flat, almost hostile. Marcus blinked, surprised by the edge in the officer's voice, but choosing to assume the best. Maybe the man was just having a bad day. "I'd like to file a report. Our church van was vandalized early this morning. Tires slashed, windshield broken, and racial slurs spray-painted on both sides. I have photos and security footage." He held up his phone to show the images through the glass partition. Callahan barely glanced at the screen. "You got insurance?" "Yes, but they require a police report to process the claim. Sounds like a civil matter. File it online." Marcus felt the first flicker of confusion. "Officer, this isn't just property damage. The spray-painted language suggests this might be a hate crime. The online system directs hate crimes to in-person reporting." Callahan let out a heavy sigh, the kind of sound meant to communicate profound annoyance. "Well, I'm telling you different. You can file online. You can leave now." The dismissiveness stung, but Marcus kept his voice level. "May I speak with your supervisor?" "Now." Callahan looked up fully, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "I am the supervisor on duty, and I've made my decision." 2 other officers were present in the station. Officer Mariah Santos, a 5-year veteran who had been processing paperwork at a desk behind the counter, looked up sharply. Her dark eyes widened with concern. Officer Tim Bradford, a rookie who'd graduated from the academy less than 6 months ago, stood near the coffee maker and froze mid-pour. Both of them recognized what was happening. Both of them stayed silent. In the waiting area, an elderly white woman with silver hair and a floral blouse sat in one of the plastic chairs. Mrs. Helen Kowalski had come to ask about a permit for a neighborhood block party. She was 71 years old, a retired librarian, and she watched the interaction at the counter with growing alarm. Marcus tried reason. He'd spent 25 years counseling people through conflicts, de-escalating tense situations, finding common ground where none seemed to exist. Surely this was just a misunderstanding. "Officer, I've filed reports at this precinct before without any issue. Can you help me understand why this situation is different?" Callahan's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was colder than that, meaner. "Maybe I'm just having a bad day. Maybe you should try another precinct." The suggestion was absurd. Marcus lived 6 blocks from this station. The vandalism happened in this precinct's jurisdiction. There was no legitimate reason to send him elsewhere. That's when Marcus realized this wasn't about procedure. This was about something else. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. Simple white cardstock with black lettering. Reverend Marcus Thompson Grace Community Church and a phone number. He slid it under the glass partition. "Officer, I'm Reverend Marcus Thompson from Grace Community Church. I'm simply asking you to perform your duty and file this report." Callahan picked up the card. "Read it." Then, with deliberate contempt, he tossed it back under the glass toward Marcus. "Oh, a reverend. Let me guess you're going to call your people, make a scene, claim discrimination. That how this works." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. Not anger yet. Something deeper. Grief. The kind of soul-deep disappointment that comes from watching someone who swore an oath to protect and serve actively choose cruelty. Callahan wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his small eyes glittering with malice. "Tell me?" "Reverend, what would Jesus do about some spray paint?" The question hung in the air like poison. Officer Santos audibly gasped. Her hand went to her mouth. Mrs. Kowalski stood up from her chair in the waiting area, her voice sharp with indignation. "That is completely out of line." Marcus stood perfectly still. His face remained composed, but his eyes, those kind eyes that had comforted so many people over so many years, held visible pain. When he spoke, his voice was steady but quieter than before. "Officer, I am going to ask one final time. Will you file this report?" Callahan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His hand moved to the pepper spray canister on his belt, not drawing it, but resting his fingers there in a clear gesture of intimidation. "No, I will not. And if you don't leave this building right now, I'll cite you for interfering with police operations." "Your choice, Reverend." The emphasis on the title was mocking, belittling. Marcus looked at this man, this officer who wore a badge that was supposed to mean something, and made a decision. He pulled out his phone and took a photograph of Callahan through the glass partition. "Delete that now!" Callahan's voice rose to a shout. "Delete that or I'll charge you with obstruction." "This is a public space," Marcus said calmly. "I'm documenting my interaction with a public servant who is refusing to provide service." Callahan turned to the rookie officer. "Bradford, escort this man out. If he resists, arrest him for trespassing." Officer Bradford's face went pale. He was 23 years old, fresh out of the academy, still believed the job was about helping people. He looked at Sergeant Callahan, then at Reverend Thompson, then at Officer Santos. Nobody moved. Officer Santos took a step toward the counter. "Reverend Thompson." "I am so." "Santos, get back to work." Callahan snapped. "He's leaving. Now." Marcus gathered his phone and his business card from the counter. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't give Callahan any excuse to escalate further. He simply turned and walked toward the exit with his dignity intact, his shoulders straight, his head high. But as he reached the door, he paused, turned back. "Sergeant Callahan," he said, his voice carrying across the lobby, "you've made your position very clear. I'll remember your courtesy." The words were gentle, but they landed like an indictment. Marcus walked out into the spring sunshine, and the door closed behind him with a soft click. Mrs. Kowalski was on her feet immediately. She rushed to the counter, her walker clattering against the floor. "Young man," she said to Callahan, her voice shaking with fury, "I have been alive for 71 years. I marched at Selma in 1965. I know exactly what I just witnessed, and it was disgraceful." Callahan waved her off. "Ma'am, you don't understand the full situation." "I understand perfectly," Mrs. Kowalski interrupted. "That man came here for help, and you mocked his faith and the color of his skin. I'm filing a complaint." She marched as much as one can march with a walker toward the precinct captain's office. Officer Santos approached Callahan the moment Mrs. Kowalski was out of earshot. "Derek, that was completely wrong. You know it was wrong." Callahan turned on her. "Stay in your lane, Santos. He's playing the race card. They always do. He just wanted to file a report, and I decided it wasn't worth our time. End of story." Callahan sat back down at his computer, dismissing her, but Officer Maria Santos didn't move. She stood there staring at her training officer, realizing with crystalline clarity that she was witnessing exactly the kind of behavior that eroded public trust. The kind of behavior that made communities fear the badge instead of respect it. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to a friend, a reporter she'd gone to college with. "I have a story you need to hear." Marcus sat in his car in the precinct parking lot for 5 full minutes before his hands stopped shaking. He wasn't angry, not yet. The anger would come later. Right now he felt something else. A deep, aching disappointment in a system he'd believed in, defended, supported for his entire adult life. Marcus had always taught his congregation to respect law enforcement, to comply with officers even when it felt unfair, to de-escalate, to trust the process. He'd counseled young black men on how to survive traffic stops. Hands visible, no sudden movements. "Yes, sir. No, sir." He'd mediated between angry community members and police after controversial arrests, urging patience, due process, faith in institutions. And now, one of those institutions had looked him in the eye and said, "You don't matter." He pulled out his phone and called Dorothy. "Honey," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word. "Something happened at the police station. Are you hurt?" Dorothy's response was immediate, sharp with concern. "No, not physically." He took a breath. "The officer refused to file the report. He mocked me, Dorothy, called me reverend like it was an insult, asked what Jesus would do about spray paint." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice Marcus had only heard a handful of times in 30 years of marriage, the voice Dorothy used when she was truly deeply angry, she said, "Did anyone witness this?" 2 officers. An elderly woman. And the precinct's own security cameras. "Then this doesn't end here. I'm calling the deacon board. We're meeting tonight. All of them." "Sweetheart, I don't want to make this bigger than it needs to be." Dorothy cut him off. "Marcus Thompson, listen to me. This isn't about you. That officer didn't just refuse you service. He mocked your faith in front of witnesses. He dismissed you because of the color of your skin. If we stay silent about this, we tell every person he mistreats in the future that we saw wrong and did nothing." Marcus closed his eyes. His wife was right. She was always right. "Okay. Emergency meeting tonight. 7 o'clock, Dorothy confirmed. And Marcus, I love you. You did nothing wrong. Remember that." Dorothy hung up and immediately texted the church secretary. "Emergency prayer chain. Pastor Marcus was mistreated at the police station this morning. Need congregational support. Details at tonight's meeting." Angela Harris received the text, and her fingers flew across her phone keyboard. As church secretary, she maintained the phone tree, a carefully organized network of 8 deacons, 12 ministry leaders, and 40 small group coordinators who could reach the entire congregation within hours. The messages spread like ripples in a pond, from Angela to the deacons, from the deacons to the ministry leaders, from the ministry leaders to the small group coordinators, from the coordinators to the congregation. Within 90 minutes, over 300 members of Grace Community Church knew that something had happened to Pastor Marcus, that he'd been mistreated, disrespected, turned away. The responses flooded back. "What can we do? This is outrageous. Pastor Marcus is the kindest man I know. Who would treat him that way? We stand with our pastor. When's the meeting? I'll be there." Dorothy read through the messages and felt something shift in her chest. Her husband believed in patience, in working through proper channels, and giving people the benefit of the doubt. But Dorothy had been a kindergarten teacher for 28 years. She knew that some people only learned through consequences, that some behaviors needed to be corrected swiftly and firmly, or they would continue. She sent a mass reply. "Meeting tonight, 7 p.m., Fellowship Hall. Bring anyone who's had similar experiences with this officer or this precinct." Then she made one more call. To Sister Linda Morrison, the church's attorney and a civil rights lawyer with a reputation for taking on cases others considered unwinnable. Linda answered on the second ring. "Dorothy, I just got Angela's message. What happened?" Dorothy told her everything Marcus had shared. The refused report, the mockery, the witnesses. Linda was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was sharp professional, the tone she used in courtrooms. "This isn't just bad customer service, Dorothy. If what you're describing is accurate, this is a civil rights violation. And if there are witnesses, if there's security footage, we have grounds for a formal complaint and potentially a lawsuit." "I don't think Marcus wants to sue anyone," Dorothy said. "Maybe not," Linda replied. "But he might not be the only person this officer has treated this way. We need to find out." Back at the precinct, Sergeant Callahan was having lunch in the break room with 2 other officers. He bit into his sandwich and chuckled. Had to deal with some reverend playing victim this morning, like he was describing mildly annoying traffic. Officer Santos, who was refilling her coffee mug, turned sharply. "Derek, that wasn't playing victim. He came in to file a legitimate hate crime report, and you refused him." Callahan waved dismissively. He wanted attention. They always do. By tomorrow, he'll forget all about it. That was Reverend Thompson Santos, said her voice tight. "Grace Community Church. 500 members." Callahan shrugged, clearly unbothered. "So what? They gonna pray me to death?" Officer Bradford, the rookie, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sarge, I think maybe we should have just filed the report. It seemed pretty straightforward. Bradford, you're still new. You'll learn. Half these complaints are garbage. People looking for insurance payouts, trying to make something out of nothing. You start taking every sob story seriously, you'll drown in paperwork." Santos slammed her coffee mug down on the counter, hard enough that coffee sloshed over the rim. "He showed you photos of racist slurs spray-painted on a church van. How is that nothing? Watch your tone, Santos, or what you'll refuse to file a report about me, too." The tension in the break room was thick enough to cut. Officer Bradford stared at his sandwich. Callahan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Santos walked out, pulling her phone from her pocket as she went. At 4:30 that afternoon, Mrs. Helen Kowalski sat in the office of Lieutenant Marcus Morris, the precinct captain, and gave her witness statement. Lieutenant Morris was a 15-year veteran, 52 years old, with graying temples and a face that had learned to show very little emotion. He'd survived in the department by being careful, by not making waves, by managing problems quietly before they became public scandals. Mrs. Kowalski was a problem he very much wanted to manage quietly. "Mrs. Kowalski," he said in his most soothing tone, "I appreciate you coming in, but I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." "There has been no misunderstanding." Mrs. Kowalski interrupted, her voice sharp as a knife. "I was sitting 15 feet away. I heard every word." Sergeant Callahan refused to file a hate crime report, mocked that man's Christian faith, and threatened him with arrest when he tried to document the interaction. "That does sound concerning," Morris said carefully. "However, I should point out that officers have discretion in determining whether a report." "Don't you dare." Mrs. Kowalski leaned forward. "I am 71 years old. I marched at Selma in 1965. I was arrested twice during sit-ins in Birmingham. I know what discrimination looks like, Lieutenant, and I know what it sounds like when someone with power uses that power to demean another human being." Lieutenant Morris sighed internally. This was not going away quietly. "I'll file your statement, but I need to be clear that this will be reviewed through the proper channels." "See that it is," Mrs. Kowalski said. She stood gripping her walker. "Because if nothing happens, if this gets swept under the rug, like I suspect it usually does, I will be contacting the newspaper, and the ACLU, and anyone else who will listen." She walked out of his office, and Lieutenant Morris sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He should have forwarded the statement to Internal Affairs immediately. Should have flagged it as urgent. Should have started an investigation. Instead, he filed it in a folder and hoped the situation would resolve itself. Hope is not a strategy, but it was all Morris had. At 7 o'clock that evening, the fellowship hall at Grace Community Church was packed beyond capacity. The fellowship hall was designed to hold about 200 people comfortably for potluck dinners and community events. Tonight, 350 people had crammed inside, sitting in folding chairs, standing along the walls, filling every available space. Emergency meetings on Wednesday nights were unheard of. People had jobs, children's homework to supervise evening routines. But when the word spread that Pastor Marcus had been mistreated, disrespected by a police officer while trying to file a hate crime report, people rearranged their schedules. The deacon board sat at a table in the front, 8 men and women who ranged in age from 42 to 73, representing different professions and backgrounds, but united in their commitment to Grace Community and to Marcus Thompson, the pastor who had married their children, buried their parents, and counseled them through every crisis life threw at them. Marcus stood at the front of the room looking uncomfortable. He hadn't wanted this. Hadn't wanted the attention, the fuss, the potential conflict. But Dorothy had insisted, and when Dorothy insisted with that particular tone in her voice, Marcus had learned over 30 years of marriage to listen. "Thank you all for coming." His voice was steady, but quieter than usual. "I want to start by saying that I'm okay. I wasn't physically harmed. This isn't a crisis. I simply wanted to share what happened this morning so you could pray about it and so we could decide together if any further action is needed." He recounted the entire interaction. The vandalized van, walking into the precinct, the officer's dismissive attitude, the refusal to file the report, the mockery of his faith. As he spoke, the room grew quieter. Faces hardened, jaws tightened. When Marcus finished, he said, "I've been praying about this all day, asking God for wisdom. I don't want to make this about me. I don't want revenge. But I also don't want this officer to treat someone else the same way tomorrow." "It's not just about you, Pastor," a voice called from the middle of the room. Sister Patricia Hayes stood. She was 62 years old, a retired nurse with silver locks and a face that usually radiated gentle strength. Tonight she looked angry. 2 years ago, I went to that same precinct to file a report. I'd been assaulted while walking home from the grocery store. A man grabbed me, tried to take my purse, knocked me to the ground. I went straight to the police station with a torn jacket and a bleeding elbow. The room was silent, listening. The officer at the desk was Sergeant Derek Callahan. He looked at me and said I probably misunderstood what happened. Said maybe it was just an accident, someone bumping into me on a crowded sidewalk. I told him I was a nurse for 35 years. I know the difference between an accident and an assault. He said if I wanted to waste everyone's time, I could file online, but he wasn't going to do it. Patricia's voice shook slightly. I left without filing, never reported it. Told myself it didn't matter because the man was gone anyway. But it did matter. Because if I'd reported it, maybe he would have been caught before he hurt someone else. 3 more hands went up around the room. Deacon William Foster stood next. 55 years old, a postal worker for 26 years, the kind of man who coached Little League and volunteered at the food bank. Last year my car was stolen from my driveway. I went to file a report at the same precinct, same officer. Sergeant Callahan looked at my address, looked at me and said, "You checked with your cousins first, right? Sometimes these things are just misunderstandings." The implication was clear, ugly. William's voice hardened. I'm a federal employee. I don't have a criminal record, never been arrested. But Callahan saw my skin color and made assumptions. A young woman stood in the back. Jasmine Reed, 28, a social worker with a toddler at home. 3 years ago, I tried to file a domestic violence report. My boyfriend at the time had hit me. I had a black eye and bruises on my arms. I went to that precinct because I was scared and I didn't know what else to do. She took a shaky breath. Sergeant Callahan asked me what I'd done to make him mad. Said maybe I should think about my own behavior before trying to ruin someone's life. I walked out without filing and went back to my boyfriend. It took 3 more months and another beating before I finally got away. By now, 15 hands were raised. 15 people with stories. 15 individuals who had sought help from Sergeant Derek Callahan and been dismissed, belittled, or turned away. Sister Linda Morrison stood. As the church's legal counsel, she'd been listening to every testimony with the focus of a lawyer building a case. This isn't one bad interaction. This is a pattern, a documented pattern of one officer refusing to serve minority citizens. And as a congregation, we have the power, and I would argue the moral obligation, to demand accountability. What are you proposing? Asked Elder James Jackson, a 70-year-old retired postal inspector who believed deeply in working through proper channels. Linda met his gaze. I'm proposing that tomorrow morning everyone who can we go to that precinct together, not to protest, not to riot, but to be present, to file formal complaints, to demand a meeting with the police chief, to make it impossible for this behavior to be ignored any longer. A murmur ran through the room, some approving, some uncertain. Elder Jackson stood. Sister Morrison, I respect your legal expertise, but shouldn't we write letters? Go through the proper channels? File complaints with internal affairs? We tried proper channels this morning, Dorothy Thompson said, standing beside her husband. The channel slammed shut in Pastor Marcus's face. But what if this makes things worse? Another member asked. What if they retaliate? What if our silence does? Dorothy countered. What if the next person Callahan dismisses is your daughter, your mother? What if the next hate crime victim who needs help is turned away because we decided it was too uncomfortable to speak up? Marcus looked at his wife, at the congregation, at the faces of people who had trusted him for 25 years. Let's vote. All in favor of Sister Morrison's proposal attending the precinct tomorrow morning to file formal complaints and request a meeting with the chief, please raise your hand. The hands went up. Not all of them, Not unanimous, but overwhelming. Marcus counted quickly. Roughly 280 of the 350 present. Then we're decided. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, we gather here and walk to the precinct together. Peacefully, prayerfully, but together. The meeting ended with a prayer. Marcus leaded his voice strong despite the exhaustion he felt. Lord, give us courage to stand firm. Give us wisdom to speak truth. Give us grace to pursue justice without hatred, and help us remember that we do this not for revenge, but so that every person, regardless of color, regardless of background, can receive the protection and service they deserve. Amen. Amen. The congregation echoed. As people filed out, one elderly woman approached Marcus. Mother Beatrice Williams, 84 years old, had been a member of Grace Community since before Marcus was born. She took his hand in both of hers. Reverend, she whispered, we've been silent too long. Tomorrow we use our voices. At 9 o'clock that night, Officer Maria Santos sat in a coffee shop across town meeting with an old college friend. Keisha Williams was an investigative journalist for the city's largest newspaper. She'd won 2 awards for her reporting on police misconduct in neighboring counties. When Santos texted her that afternoon, Keisha had cleared her evening schedule immediately. Tell me everything. Keisha's notebook was open recorder on the table between them. Santos did. She described the interaction she'd witnessed. Callahan's tone, his mocking of Marcus's faith, the refusal to file the report, the way he'd threatened arrest when Marcus tried to document the encounter. How many people are we talking about tomorrow? Keisha asked. I'm hearing 300 to 500. The church has a big congregation and word is spreading. Keisha's eyes widened. 500 people descending on a police precinct, peacefully Santos emphasized. I know Reverend Thompson's reputation. He's not a radical. He doesn't organize protests. If he's doing this, it's because Callahan pushed him past every reasonable limit. Will you go on the record? Santos hesitated. Going on record meant risking her career, her relationships with fellow officers, her standing in the department. But she thought about Marcus Thompson's face, the pain in his eyes when Callahan mocked his faith, the quiet dignity with which he'd left. Not yet. But I'll provide background, and if this goes where I think it's going, I'll testify if needed. Keisha nodded. By 11 o'clock that night, she'd contacted her editor. By midnight, 2 other reporters from rival news stations had been tipped off by their own sources. By 6 the next morning, 4 television news crews and 3 newspaper journalists had crews assigned to cover potential civil rights demonstration at Midtown Precinct. Sergeant Derek Callahan heard about it from the night shift sergeant when he arrived for his 7 a.m. shift. Hey, Callahan, Officer Davis said as Derek poured coffee in the break room. Heard some church group might be showing up this morning. Something about you refusing a report yesterday? Callahan snorted. Yeah, some reverend got his feelings hurt. Let 'em come. They'll stand around for 20 minutes, get bored, and leave. Nobody actually cares about this stuff. Officer Davis looked uncertain. I heard it might be a lot of people. How many? 20, 30. Callahan shrugged. We get protesters all the time. They yell, we ignore them, they go home. This is no different. He was wrong, catastrophically wrong. But arrogance is a powerful blindfold, and Derek Callahan had been wearing his for 12 years. At 7:30 Thursday morning, the parking lot of Grace Community Church looked like a staging ground for something historic. 425 people had gathered. The number exceeded every expectation. Grandmothers with walkers stood beside teenagers. Parents held toddlers on their hips. Professionals in business suits stood shoulder to shoulder with construction workers in work boots. The congregation had come, and they'd brought friends, family members, neighbors who had heard the story and wanted to stand in solidarity. Everyone had dressed intentionally. This wasn't protest attire. No ripped jeans, no aggressive slogans. This was Sunday best: suits and ties, dresses, and church hats. The message was clear. We are respectable, dignified citizens demanding what we're owed. People carried Bibles, handwritten signs with messages like "Serve all citizens" and "Faith demands justice." Bouquets of flowers that some of the elderly women had brought, though no one could quite articulate why flowers felt right. They just did. Something about beauty in the face of ugliness. Dorothy Thompson moved through the crowd with clipboards, organizing people into groups, making sure everyone understood the plan. Sister Linda Morrison stood on the church steps with a megaphone she'd borrowed from the youth ministry. "Listen up, everyone." Linda's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. "We are walking to the precinct together. We will remain peaceful at all times. No shouting. No confrontation. When we arrive, I will request a meeting with Police Chief Mitchell on behalf of the congregation. Those who have complaints to file will have the opportunity to do so. We are not here to riot. We are here to be seen and heard." Someone called from the crowd, and heard Linda agreed. Marcus stood at the front with Dorothy. He looked at the faces around him. People he'd baptized, married, counseled, prayed with for 25 years. He felt a lump in his throat. "Are you ready?" Dorothy asked softly. Marcus nodded. "Let's walk." At 8:15, the congregation began to move. They walked in organized rows, not a disorderly mob, but a disciplined march. Marcus and Dorothy at the front, the deacon board behind them, then the ministry leaders, then the congregation spreading across the sidewalk in a river of purpose. The distance from Grace Community Church to Midtown Precinct was exactly 7/10 of a mile, normally a 12-minute walk. This morning, with 400 people moving together, it took 18 minutes. As they walked, the church choir, unprompted, unrehearsed, began to hum. Softly at first, then louder. The melody was old, familiar, powerful. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. They didn't sing the words, just hummed the tune. The sound rose and fell like a wave, and it was beautiful and mournful and defiant all at once. People came out of their houses to watch. Shop owners stepped onto sidewalks. Drivers slowed their cars. 4 television news crews followed the march, cameras rolling, capturing every moment. A helicopter from Channel 7 circled overhead. By the time the congregation reached the precinct, the crowd had swelled to over 500. Neighbors had joined. Strangers who heard the humming and came to see. Members from other churches who'd heard about the plan and wanted to stand in solidarity. 500 people. Inside Midtown Precinct, Sergeant Derek Callahan was pouring his second cup of coffee when Officer Bradford rushed into the break room, his face pale. "Sarge, you need to see this." Callahan followed him to the front windows. Outside, the plaza in front of the precinct was filling with people. Not 20, not 50. Hundreds. They filled the sidewalks, spilled into the street. Police had to redirect traffic. They stood silently orderly, an ocean of faces and Sunday clothes and quiet determination. At the front stood Reverend Marcus Thompson. Callahan's coffee mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Oh no. Officer Santos appeared beside him. "You thought they'd just forget Derek. You thought mocking a pastor in front of his congregation wouldn't have consequences. This can't be about yesterday. This is 500 people who refuse to be dismissed," Santos said coldly. "And every news camera in the city is watching." Lieutenant Morris burst out of his office phone pressed to his ear, face red with panic. "Where the hell is Chief Mitchell?" Police Chief Raymond Mitchell was 62 years old, a 35-year veteran of law enforcement and a black man who had navigated the complexities of his profession with careful diplomacy for decades. He'd received the call from Lieutenant Morris at 8:55 while eating breakfast at home. "Chief, we have a situation. Grace Community Church is here, with a lot of people. How many is a lot, Marcus? I'm estimating 500, sir, and growing. Media is here. This is on TV right now. Chief Mitchell had turned on his television, flipped to Channel 4, saw the aerial shot from the helicopter. His heart sank. He knew Marcus Thompson, had met him at community events, police community forums, holiday gatherings. Marcus was one of the good ones, the kind of faith leader who built bridges instead of burning them, who preached cooperation and peace. If Marcus Thompson was mobilizing his congregation like this, something had gone very, very wrong. Mitchell grabbed his uniform jacket and keys. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Do not engage that crowd. Do you understand me? Not one officer approaches them until I get there. He'd called the mayor on his drive over. The mayor's response had been succinct and profane. Ray, this is on every news channel. Handle it. Now. Chief Mitchell arrived at 9 o'clock sharp. He parked in the lot behind the precinct, walked around to the front entrance, and stopped. 500 people, maybe more. Silent. Waiting. 4 television crews. Cameras pointed at him. He took a breath, straightened his uniform, and walked out onto the precinct steps. The crowd parted slightly, and Reverend Marcus Thompson stepped forward. Beside him stood a woman Mitchell recognized, Linda Morrison, one of the city's most respected civil rights attorneys. This was very, very bad. I'm Chief Raymond Mitchell. His voice projected across the plaza. I understand there was an incident yesterday. Marcus's voice was calm but carried weight. Chief Sergeant Derek Callahan refused to file a hate crime report and mocked my Christian faith in front of multiple witnesses. Mitchell had reviewed the security footage on his drive over. Lieutenant Morris had sent it to his phone. He'd watched the entire interaction. Callahan's dismissiveness, the mockery, the threat of arrest. He knew Marcus was telling the truth. Reverend Thompson, I'd like to discuss this inside my office where we can have a productive conversation. We tried inside yesterday, Chief. It didn't work. We'll discuss it here where my community can witness. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mitchell looked at 500 faces, at the cameras, at the reporters with microphones. His options had just evaporated. He could try to disperse the crowd, but they were peaceful within their rights, and attacking them would create a national scandal. He could try to minimize the situation, but the security footage existed, witnesses existed, and Linda Morrison's presence meant legal action was already being considered. He could defend Callahan, but the man's personnel file was a liability, and defending him meant defending the indefensible on camera. Chief Raymond Mitchell had spent 35 years in law enforcement. He knew when a situation was unwinnable. This was unwinnable. I've reviewed the security footage from yesterday. Chief Mitchell's voice was steady, professional, but there was steel underneath. Sergeant Callahan's conduct was unacceptable. The crowd remained silent, waiting. Effective immediately, Sergeant Derek Callahan is suspended without pay pending a full internal affairs investigation. A murmur ran through the congregation. Not celebration. Something quieter. Relief, maybe. Or the beginning of it. But Chief Linda Morrison stepped forward. This isn't about one officer having a bad day. We have 23 people here who attempted to file reports with Sergeant Callahan over the past 5 years. All minorities. All dismissed, discouraged, or turned away. She handed him a thick folder. Written statements, dates, case numbers that were never assigned. This is a pattern, not an incident. Mitchell took the folder, felt its weight. It was damning. These complaints will be reviewed, every single one, by an independent civilian panel, not internal review. And oversight, Marcus asked. How do we ensure this doesn't happen again? Mitchell looked at the Reverend, at the crowd, at the cameras broadcasting this conversation to the entire city. I will recommend to the City Council the establishment of a permanent community police oversight board, with subpoena power, with civilian members. with real authority to investigate complaints and recommend discipline. It was more than he'd planned to give, more than he'd been authorized to promise. But the crowd, the cameras, the moment demanded it, and I personally apologized to Reverend Thompson and to every person who was denied service by an officer sworn to protect them. For the first time, Marcus's composure cracked slightly. His eyes glistened. "Thank you, Chief." Then something happened that no one expected. Mrs. Helen Kowalski pushed through the crowd with her walker moving with determination until she reached the front. Chief Mitchell, her voice carried despite her age. "I'm the white woman who filed a witness statement yesterday. Your lieutenant buried it. I want you to know that." Lieutenant Morris, watching from inside the precinct, went pale. Mrs. Kowalski continued. "I'm 71 years old. I marched at Selma. I was arrested in Birmingham. I know what injustice looks like, and I saw it yesterday. These people deserve better. We all do." Her presence was powerful. A white woman, elderly, respectable, validating everything the congregation claimed. The cameras focused on her, and Mitchell knew this image, this cross-racial alliance, would dominate the news coverage. There was no spinning this, no minimizing it. Sister Patricia Hayes stepped forward next. "Chief, 2 years ago, Sergeant Callahan laughed when I tried to report being assaulted." Her voice was steady but filled with emotion. "He told me I probably misunderstood what happened. I was a nurse for 35 years. I know the difference between misunderstanding and battery." Deacon William Foster spoke next. "Callahan told me to check with my cousins when I reported my stolen car. I'm a federal employee. I don't have a criminal record. But he saw my skin and made assumptions." Jasmine Reed, the young mother, was crying as she spoke. "He asked me what I did to deserve being hit. I stayed with my abuser for 3 more months because I was too ashamed to try reporting again. One by one, testimony after testimony. Each one a hammer blow. Each one documented. Each one corroborated." Chief Mitchell listened to all of it. His jaw tightened with each story. When the testimonies ended, he turned to the crowd and spoke with genuine emotion. "I am ashamed. Ashamed that this happened under my watch. Ashamed that complaints were filed and dismissed. Ashamed that people in this community feared the very institution meant to protect them." He paused. "But shame without action is worthless. So here's what will happen. Every complaint ever filed against Sergeant Callahan will be reinvestigated. Victims will be contacted. Cases that should have been pursued will be reopened. And anyone officer or supervisor who enabled this behavior will face consequences." Inside the precinct, Sergeant Derek Callahan stood at the window watching his career disintegrate in real time. He'd thought he was untouchable. The Union had always protected him. Complaints had always disappeared. He'd learned the system exploited its weaknesses and believed himself immune. But he'd underestimated one critical factor: collective action. One complaint could be buried. 23 presented together on camera with a respected reverend and a civil rights attorney could not. Callahan turned from the window and tried to retreat to the break room. He didn't make it. Officer Santos and 3 other officers were standing there blocking his path. "You're done, Derek. We're not covering for you anymore." The Union Callahan started. "The Union's abandoning you," Santos interrupted. "They already called. Said they're not defending blatant misconduct on camera. You're on your own." Callahan's face went from red to white. "You can't do this to me. We're not doing anything. You did this to yourself." Outside, Marcus Thompson addressed the crowd one final time. "We didn't come here for revenge." His voice carried over the silent plaza. "We came here because faith without action is empty, because silence in the face of wrong is complicity, because our children deserve a world where the color of their skin doesn't determine whether they receive protection or dismissal." He paused, looking at the faces around him. His congregation, his community, his family. Let us pray. 500 people bowed their heads. Lord, we thank you that our voices were heard today. We pray for healing in this community. We pray for wisdom for Chief Mitchell as he works to reform his department. And we even pray for Sergeant Callahan that he might find the healing he needs to see every person as a child of God, worthy of dignity and respect. The prayer was broadcast live on 4 channels. It was shared millions of times on social media within hours. The image of 500 people standing peacefully in Sunday clothes, praying for justice and even for their antagonist, became iconic. By noon, the Washington Post had picked up the story. By 3 o'clock, CNN ran a segment. By 5 o'clock, the Department of Justice announced a preliminary civil rights investigation into the Midtown precinct. By 7 o'clock, Sergeant Derek Callahan's police union issued a statement. After reviewing the evidence, we find we cannot in good conscience defend conduct that violates the trust between law enforcement and the community. We will not be representing Sergeant Callahan in this matter. Translation: You're on your own. Callahan was fired within a week. The termination was swift, unanimous, and final. Criminal charges followed. Federal civil rights violations. He pleaded guilty 2 months later to avoid trial, receiving 18 months probation and a permanent ban from law enforcement. 11 other officers received reprimands for witnessing misconduct and failing to report it. Lieutenant Morris was demoted for burying Mrs. Kowalski's complaint. Officer Maria Santos was promoted to Community Liaison Officer, a position created specifically to rebuild trust between the precinct and the neighborhoods it served. The policy changes came quickly, driven by public pressure and city council action. Within 3 weeks, all police reports had to be filed electronically with automatic supervisor review within 24 hours. No single officer could unilaterally refuse a report. Body cameras became mandatory for all public-facing interactions, including desk duty. A community police oversight board was established with 5 civilian members, 3 of them selected by community organizations. Sister Linda Morrison was appointed co-chair. Within 6 months, complaint filing rate increased by 340%. Not because police behavior worsened, but because people trusted the system again. Investigation completion rate jumped to 91%, up from 34%. Chief Mitchell implemented quarterly bias training for all officers. The precinct began hosting monthly community forums where citizens could voice concerns directly to command staff. The changes weren't perfect. Systems built over decades don't transform overnight. But they were real. Measurable. A start. 6 months later, on a Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, Reverend Marcus Thompson walked through the doors of Midtown Precinct. He approached the service counter where Officer Maria Santos sat at the desk, a position she'd requested after her promotion because she wanted to be the first face people saw when they came seeking help. "Good morning, Reverend Thompson. How can I help you today?" Marcus smiled. "Morning, Officer Santos. I need to file a vandalism report. Different church this time, the Methodist congregation, 2 neighborhoods over. Their community center had windows broken last night." "I'm sorry to hear that." Santos was already pulling up the electronic form on her computer. "Do you have photos or any information about possible suspects?" "I have photos." Marcus pulled out his phone. "And they have security footage they're willing to share." Santos processed the report efficiently, professionally, respectfully. Within 10 minutes, Marcus had a case number, a follow-up appointment scheduled with a detective, and assurance that patrol presence would increase in that neighborhood. "Is there anything else you need, Reverend No Officer Santos? This is exactly what serving the community looks like." "Thank you." As Marcus turned to leave, he noticed a young black man standing in line behind him, holding the hand of an 8-year-old boy. The boy was staring at Marcus with wide eyes. "Dad," the boy whispered, "is that the Reverend from TV?" The father nodded, then said to Marcus, "Reverend Thompson, I just want to say thank you. What you did 6 months ago, it made it safe for us to be here. My son and I were in a car accident yesterday, and I didn't hesitate to come file a report because I knew I'd be treated right." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He knelt down to the boy's level. "What's your name, young man, Isaiah?" the boy said shyly. "Isaiah, do you know what your name means?" The boy shook his head. "It means salvation of the Lord. It's a powerful name. And I want you to remember something, Isaiah. When you see something wrong, when you see someone being treated unfairly, you have a voice. And when you use that voice, even when you're scared, even when it's hard, God can use it to change the world." Isaiah nodded solemnly, like he was receiving a sacred trust. Marcus stood, shook the father's hand, and walked out into the sunshine. Later that afternoon, Marcus returned to his office at Grace Community Church. The walls were covered with letters now, dozens of them from pastors and community leaders across the country who had heard the story and reached out. Some wanted advice on organizing their own communities. Some shared similar stories of dismissal and discrimination. Some just wanted to say thank you for showing that peaceful organized action could create real change. Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID. Area code from a different state. Reverend Thompson speaking. "Reverend Thompson, my name is Pastor David Williams from Cincinnati. Something happened to one of my congregation members at our local police station yesterday. She was turned away disrespected. I don't know what to do, but I heard about what you did and I was hoping you could tell me how." Marcus smiled. "I'll tell you what we all did, Pastor Williams, and you can do it too." He spent the next hour walking Pastor Williams through the process: how to gather testimonies, how to organize peacefully, how to engage media, how to demand accountability without resorting to violence or chaos. When the call ended, Marcus added Cincinnati to the map on his wall, a map tracking cities where congregations had replicated the Grace Community model. There were now 47 pins across the country. A movement was spreading, not because Marcus had intended to start one, but because the template worked. Faith communities organizing for justice, peaceful presence demanding accountability, collective action that systems couldn't ignore. 1 year to the day after Sergeant Derek Callahan refused to file a report, the city held a dedication ceremony. They'd built a new community justice center next to the precinct, funded partially by a settlement from the lawsuit Grace Community had filed against the department, partially by city funds. The building housed the Community Police Oversight Board, provided free legal consultation for citizens filing complaints, and offered mediation services for community police disputes. A bronze plaque was mounted near the entrance, in honor of those who stood for accountability. Grace Community Congregation, May 2024. Faith demands justice. Silence enables wrong. Communities change systems when they refuse to be dismissed. Marcus stood at the podium for the dedication, looking out at a crowd that included Chief Mitchell Mayor Rodriguez, members of City Council, and 300 people from Grace Community. Mrs. Helen Kowalski sat in the front row, now a regular member of Grace Community Church. She'd left her previous congregation after realizing, as she told Marcus, "I spent 71 years going to church where everyone looked like me." That was part of the problem. This building stands because 500 people refused to be silent, because witnesses spoke up, because a community said enough. Justice isn't a gift handed down from institutions. It's a demand we make of broken systems until they bend toward what's right. He paused, looking at the young faces in the crowd. Children who would grow up in a city where oversight existed, where complaints were taken seriously, where the color of your skin didn't determine whether you received protection or dismissal. We didn't do this for revenge. We did it so that every child in this city can walk into a police station and receive the help they need. So that every parent can call 911 without fear. So that the badge means protection for everyone, not just some. The crowd applauded. Not the raucous cheering of victory, but the steady, sustained applause of people who know the work isn't finished, but progress has been made. That evening, Marcus sat in his church office preparing Sunday's sermon. His phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. "Come home, honey. Dinner's ready. You've done enough for today." Marcus smiled, saved his work, and stood to leave. As he locked the office door, he glanced back at the map on his wall. 47 cities, 47 congregations organizing for justice, 47 communities learning that faith without action is empty, but faith with courage can move mountains. The precinct still stood on the same corner it always had. The bulletproof glass remained. The service counter looked the same, but everything had changed, because 500 people proved that collective action matters, that systems bend when communities refuse to accept injustice, that one person dismissed can become 500 people demanding accountability. Sergeant Derek Callahan had thought he could mock one reverend without consequences. He'd forgotten that reverend represented 500 families, generations of resilience, and a faith that doesn't just pray for change, it organizes for it. Grace Community Church still feeds 200 homeless people monthly, still runs youth programs, still mediates conflicts, still serves the community 7 days a week. But now, they also hold power accountable. They also monitor the precinct. They also stand ready to mobilize when injustice occurs. And that's not just a victory for one congregation. That's a blueprint for every community. Marcus drove home through streets he'd known for 25 years. Past the park where they served meals, past the school where Dorothy taught, past houses where congregation members lived. People he'd baptized, married, buried, counseled through every storm life threw at them. He thought about Wednesday morning a year ago, walking into that precinct expecting routine service and receiving contempt instead. He thought about the pain of that moment, the grief, the disappointment in a system he'd believed in. And he thought about Thursday morning, 500 people standing together, voices raised not in anger, but in unified demand for dignity. Sometimes change requires disruption. Sometimes justice demands that comfortable people become uncomfortable. Sometimes faith means more than prayer. It means action. Marcus pulled into his driveway. Dorothy was waiting on the porch, and the smell of her cooking drifted through the screen door. He climbed the steps, kissed his wife, and walked inside to a home filled with warmth and love. Tomorrow he'd preach, he'd counsel, he'd serve, and if necessary, he'd stand up again, because that's what shepherds do. They protect the flock, all of it, from threats outside and from wolves in sheep's clothing. Grace Community Church had shown the world that faith communities could demand justice without abandoning grace. That peaceful presence could be more powerful than violent protest. That 500 voices speaking as one could topple careers built on bigotry and bend institutions that thought themselves untouchable. The story wasn't over. The work would continue. New challenges would emerge. But for tonight, Marcus Thompson, Reverend husband, father, grandfather, shepherd to 500 souls, sat down to dinner with his wife and gave thanks. For justice. For community. For the courage to stand when standing was hard. And for the reminder that sometimes the most radical act of faith is refusing to be silent. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that communities have power when they act together, if it showed you that one person dismissed can become hundreds demanding change, share it. Not for attention, for accountability, because the next congregation might be yours. The next pastor might be someone you love. The next Callahan might be serving in your precinct. And when communities stand together, even the most fortified systems must answer. Remember Grace Community. Remember what 500 voices can do. And subscribe to our channel because stories of courage, justice, and faith changing the world deserve to be told. Grace, community, justice, action.